Let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. Fear God, keep His commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. Amen. It's ben-Yehudah, man. High levels, bro, high as could be. Word to Rastafari, there's a holler in me. Every morning when I wake up, spend time on my knees. No sneezing necessary, the blessings received. Who lesser than me? Not a soul. We all got it and passed on it like common codes. I got tired of blowing it like a snotty nose. When will He return? Nobody knows. So I plant my seeds daily and water the field. There's a lot of people out here ignoring He real. Putting money before Him wasn't part of the deal. So I was being popular for a part of His meal. Feed me, Ezekiel, no Elliot. Heaven sent in the world full of these Hellenists. These Greek lovers, these genociders, these terrorists. The book's burning, give us another Exodus. I wanna see my people prosper.
You know, we have ones that's a Rastafari, live in the city, Kingston City, Manhattan,
Yeah.
like you know. We live amongst our universal brothers and sisters, and Rastafari is for each and every one. So it's not this weird thing where you have to live in the forest, no. But you have ones that live in the forest, and they hold an order for the ones like I and I who can come in now and hold our meds and come to these places and remove ourselves from that type of way and still come find our brothers in the midst of the jungle as well as in the city.
Exactly.
So it's a brotherhood throughout universe.
Yeah,
iPhones included, cameras included, cars included, planes,
everything,
palace, huts, rivers, ocean, the whole thing, huh?
And the thing about it too as well is that Rastafari is not a cult, yes?
No.
So we're not looking for more followers to say, hey, everyone have to come and be Rastafari. No, we're looking at people and their heart.
We are all about love.
And all right, so now getting to much of our more in-depth commentary. And this is the part where you probably should get your notes, because we definitely have ours here as we are about to expound upon what we actually have shared with you so far as all of the information that is more recent and up to date here in the here and now. And even so, in a sense, again, give a lot more credence to what we have already spoken on thus far. And again, kind of to reel everything back in as far as all of the topical matters and themes and subjects which we have so far given as far as these segments are composed of. We're speaking on, or at least let me give one's two notes at least to research for themselves and kind of delve a bit more into once concluding here for this particular podcast. We're speaking specifically to socioeconomics and demographics. And a lot of times, especially with more of the general population, these two subject matters tend to overlap, or in a sense become conflated. They kind of become confused between the two. Sometimes ones tend to not over-exaggerate, but exaggerate certain points and give many similarities as far as demographics is and as pertaining to socioeconomics. So when we're speaking of socioeconomics, we're speaking of more so the study or the social science in that sense to how economic activity affects many social processes, or at least many social activities on that sense. So we're speaking on economics and how it affects social activity. So to give an example of that in a sense, just to put it plainly, socioeconomics or social economics, that's what one's actually hearing. It's just a coined phrase for social economics. Ones tend to study, or at least those within this particular field, they tend to study how many societies either progress, stagnate, or regress. So we're seeing if any given society is actually moving forward, if it's at a standstill, or if it's, again, degressing, or in many senses, to give a term which ones have heard a lot now and at least, are fairly familiar with in recession or in depression in that sense, or heading towards depression in that sense. So that kind of gives, a little bit more body to what we are speaking on as far as, our topic is here for this evening. And even so, ones can even add in a sense that many societies are usually divided up into three groups also. Again, this kind of Trinitarian, viewpoint to actually drive in the point and give ones a little bit more of a clear understanding of what we're speaking on. And societies usually are divvied up into social, cultural, or economic, and that usually kind of stems between many within the general population, where one could be part of one social group, but they can also be part of a cultural group as well. And even so, in a sense, one could be part of all three: social, cultural, or economic, or one could have a sense of being part of one or two and not part of the other. So it fluctuates between what standing one has in any given society or any given group. So all of this, it plays into general public and one's everyday life and how they tend to maneuver throughout that society wherever they might be in the world. So just to give that a look and a sense of more so an explanation, for those who may be hearing these type of terms for the first time. Now, when we get to actually demographics, we're speaking on specific studies on populations within a given society, and that kind of where things usually gets kind of conflated in that sense. So when we're speaking on socioeconomics, we're speaking on studying the society, or at least studying the economic activity of a society and how it's being affected by that economic activity. But when we're speaking on demographics, we're speaking on specific groups within a society. An example of this, again, just to clarify what we're speaking on this sense. When we speak of demographics, we're speaking on points like age, gender, income, education, religion, socioeconomic status, and not to, again, conflate that in a sense, but more so to give, again, a bit more of an explanation for one's trying to understand a little bit more what we're speaking on here and what we're expounding upon. And again, just something that has really caught an eye for quite some time, and we'll probably do a little bit more of an expounding upon this, especially in video form. So those who usually check for us on YouTube and other places, other platforms, be sure to look out for this upcoming video, because there are a lot of charts, there are a lot of, I guess you can say, some PowerPoint presentation like images that we can actually present with this, and that we're actually going through at the moment, and it will help to kind of bring things home and not just rely on one's listening to the sound of our voice, but also have a visual that they can refer to, and again take more notes on and revisit whenever they have the time or whenever time allows. Now, what we actually had found so interesting about this entire subject matter was that we happened to be studying a little bit of this, or at least found ourselves gaining some interest in a lot of these subject matters, was after we read a particular book by one Harry S. Dent Jr. And this book was called The Demographic Cliff, subtitled How to Survive and Prosper During the Great Inflation Ahead. So again, this book was written sometime around 2013 to 15. We discovered it around the 2015 year, and it was quite an interesting book, which led us to explore a lot more of the things that Mr. Dent was actually speaking on, and again coming across many other economists and financial advisors, estate planners, this, that, and the third. It just kind of really getting our feet wet as far as studying a lot of what we were becoming so interested in at a particular point in time in our own personal life. So hopefully this will have an effect on whoever may get a chance to listen to what we have here, and also check out the visuals which we will be placing up very soon. And again, so just speaking on population growth or stagnation or regression, a lot of that plays so much that plays so much plays so much of a role within a given society that it really, gives certain ones, if they are savvy enough, and again, have or even so been trained to do so, to not only assess a society from a certain standpoint, but also give them a foresight into seeing how things may play out just by studying human activity as a whole. And that really is what we had found within a one Harry S. Dent Jr. at a particular time, and also with his said particular group of associates with Dent Research. And we'll leave probably a lot of information here for ones to check out a lot of what Dent Research and the Dent Research Group has to present as far as demographics and all of the information that they have been sharing for quite some years. The last time I checked, I think it was to the tune of some odd 30 or so years that they've been doing a lot of this research, especially Mr. Dent himself. And that really kind of brought a lot of things home for us, or at least opened us up to studying these things a lot more frequently than not. And even so here, just coming to again what we were speaking on in our earlier subject matters, we began to look at certain things like population growth, and even so not just so here on these shores in the United States of America, but on a worldly stage in full. And even so with a lot of the infographic details that were put together by certain ones there at Dent Research, along with other supplementary works that were done by other groups that we have been able to collect and archive for ourselves, and kind of save, and back up those files, and again keep for later dates and any given time when we may actually see fit to utilize them if needed. I even saw a one infographic here speaking from Mr. Dent's perspective, the gloomy outlook for the global economy, and he shows in a sense that this is not just something subject to Western society or the United States of America or Great Britain or whatever country there in the West. This is truly an international theme, and something that ones can actually begin to look into to start at least not only understanding the international economy and how things work, at least from the ground up, but they can at least get the wheels turning as far as understanding what systems have been put into place, and what systems are actually working, which ones are not, and which ones just so happen to still be standing, even though they are not benefiting either way. So this really gives quite a perspective for once to look into, just to say the least. And even so, while we are still here finding the words to give a bit more of a straightforward interpretation of these themes, we'll get into what we actually have been presenting here so far. So here, even so, from this particular infographic, we see from Mr. Dent Jr., the anticipated decrease in consumer spending by country due to aging populations. Now, remember, again, we spoke on the baby boomer generation just slightly earlier. The Generation X population, and even so coming to the millennials, which we focused on the most here, because that's seemingly the largest population group now here, especially in the United States. And we'll have to check the numbers again to see if this is actually the case in other countries as well. But even so, here in the United States of America, it is found so to the tune of some 80 to 86 million people as far as being classified under the millennial generation population. So giving that with Mr. Dent and Dent Research Group's information they mentioned here, and this is again just some years ago, in between the 2013 to 2015 year, of many of the predictions that they were able to make, or at least the assessments they were able to gather. They mentioned a decrease in consumer spending usually leads to 1, economic slowdown, 2, large wealth transfers through benefits for retirees, and 3, contraction in credit. And a lot of the sources that they cite, of course, is the Dent Research Group themselves, the U.S. Census Bureau, and also the United Nations Populations Division. Here, even so, just very interesting enough, they had an assessment where they actually had a cliff, and where many of the countries were represented by certain boats. Just a small stick figuring drawing with certain flags and particular years in which they had assessments and where certain countries were set or at least predicted to quote unquote fall off of the economic cliff. And here, even so, they have from 1986, Japan being the first, and even so that can be confirmed in many ways, more than one. Even so, moving next to the United States in 2005, which, again, give or take a few years, that actually was pretty accurate with the, of course, housing market crash during the 2007 to 2008 year. Next up, the United Kingdom for 2013, and even so, coming up until this time here, we're still even dealing with the after effects of Brexit and a lot of the European Union. We wouldn't say negotiations at this point. It's been, for the most part, a free fall for as far as a lot of the policies that they've been trying to enact, a lot of the policies that they've been trying to revamp, many of the referendums that have been going on from country to country as far as the European Union is concerned. Again, give or take a few years, 2 to 3 at average. A lot of the predictions and a lot of the assessments from Dent Research or the Dent Research Group have been pretty accurate and on point. But moving to the next would be Germany, also in 2013, France in 2020, and even so, we're seeing the effects of France, in which we have spoken on here, and many other places as well, especially on our YouTube channel. For those who check us out there at Yefdi on YouTube, the Yellow Vest protest has been, again, ongoing for now at least the past 6 to 7 months. And that even speaks specifically to a lot of the economic troubles that have been going on there in France. But continuing on here, Italy set for 2018. South Korea came up at least on their radar there at Dent Research for 2018. And of course, even surprisingly, China comes up in 2025. So leaving that on the table, we'll expound a little bit more on that moving forward through what we have here. But heading off in the last economic boat or stick figuring drawing, at least a representation of a particular country falling off the economic cliff as far as Dent Research is concerned. They have a prediction set or an assessment set here for Spain in 2025. So a very interesting outlook, a very interesting worldview as far as Dent Research is concerned. And again, we have to give credit where credit is due from what we have been able to read, research, and assess for ourselves. The Dent Research Group and the associates there have been pretty accurate, even so to the tune of just, a year or 2 or 3 before time or behind time. So it, depending on your own viewpoint, your own worldview, you can actually assess these things for yourself. Once you actually have had the time to do the research and actually go through a lot of the numbers, go through a lot of the charts, check out, whatever news platform is your most comfortable, or at least we would even so suggest checking out more than one resource, and that really will give you an overall perspective, or at least give you some different viewpoints on how things are continuing to shape up and how they have shaped up from the past. But even so, continuing on here with a little bit more of the research, much of the countries that have been set or at least predicted to have a lot of steam being pushed behind them as far as becoming what the Dent Research Group also calls in 3 categories: the gainers, the sideways survivors, and also the decliners. Here, this infographic is entitled, "How Will Your Country Fare After the Global Economic Shakedown?" Or at least once the the global economy shakes out. Very interesting here. Subtitled, "The Demographics Tell Us Which Countries Are Poised for Growth in the Years Ahead." And remember, again, as we mentioned before, the Dent Research Group relies heavily on demographics, so the study of the population within any given sector of society or country, so on and so forth, to give them a lot of the pinpoints in their assessments for which they will be sharing a lot of their information. So here with many of the gainers, just some subsets and pinpoints that allow them to make these assessments are in a sense as such. One, positive demographics and or benefits for the most, or at least the highest number of the population. Two, there are higher immigration rates. Three, there are higher birth rates. Three, there is real estate increasing, but not like in the past, or at least there are certain caveats there. And also four, within the gainers sector, the stock markets, if they have those particular apparatuses in place, will make new highs and will be adjusted for inflation with the next global boom. And a global boom, just for a side note here, is usually a particular time of expansion of any given said economy. For those who haven't heard those terms before, usually within many of certain financial circles or fintech circles, financially fintech or financial technology sectors, certain groups, ones who do certain trading, whether that be forex or stocks, bonds, extended traded funds, those type of things that usually come up in an everyday conversation, especially for those who tend to pay a lot more attention to economics. These things usually come up, and one particular subject matter, or at least theme, is called a boom and bust effect. Usually a boom is categorized by economic expansion, and a bust is usually a time of economic contraction or deflation or inflation or depression, regression, recession, so on and so forth. So one can kind of get the gist of that when they kind of hear those terms, again, whether they be throughout everyday life, so on and so forth. And here in this sector of the gainers, the Dent Research Group seems to place the state of Israel, Australia, Switzerland, New Zealand, Norway, Sweden, and Singapore, just for a few examples of the gainers that are set to expand a bit as far as the next international or global boom within the international economy. Next up here we have the sideways survivors, and this is categorized in 3 points, in which the first point is there will be new replacement birth rates. 2, there will still be high productivity. And 3, real estate and or stocks will be more flat and will be adjusted for inflation. Within this particular sector, this is more of your stagnation as far as a lot of the countries that will be placed in this so-called sideways survivors group. And within this group, they find that the countries that tend to kind of fit this mold a little bit more than not are the United States of America, Canada, France, the United Kingdom, and also Denmark. So again, very interesting. As we mentioned before, these studies were done at least 4 to 5 to 6 years ago, and some things that we were going over at a particular time when we were kind of prompted and more so inspired to look into these things a little bit more intently. And here for the third group, we speak of the decliners, or at least the Dent Research Group speaks of the decliners, and this is categorized by at least a few points here. We'll go through the first point: demographic decline or population decline. 2, low birth rates. 3, a shrinking population, which also speaks to the demographic decline. 4, a workforce decline. 5, real estate will be in excess supply. And 6, stocks will be down for a longer time and never see the past highs of before. So basically the stock market will reach certain lows that it will not recover as far as that is concerned within these given countries. And the countries that tend to come into mind as far as Dent Research is concerned, just for examples, will be Japan, Germany, Portugal, Italy, Austria, Russia, the Netherlands, Belgium, Spain, Greece, Taiwan, South Korea, China, and Finland, just for a few examples here. And again, not just given a lot of this research that has been done, quite a bit extensive, we can say, just on the outset here, and just to say the least on this note. And once ones actually start to look into a lot of these things for themselves, they'll start to see a lot more than they did before, and will actually have to come to the realization that a lot of these international studies, even so to the micro and macro level, as far as that is concerned, will definitely give them a bit more insight and foresight into what's coming ahead. And so just speaking again to the greater points that we were bringing forward as far as this millennial generation and a lot of the segments we were speaking on earlier, and giving a bit more credence to that here with, again, continuing with Dent Research Group's information and many of the infographics that they have put together. Mr. One Harry S. Dent Jr. speaks of their power, or our power to predict, in a sense. Here it's more superscribed as such, how the spending patterns of the biggest, richest, and most powerful generation ever impacts our economy, speaking to the United States of America's economy specifically. Now here, again, as we mentioned before actually coming to the realization that the millennial generation has now overtaken the baby boomer generation, here the Dent Research Group actually still had this study, again, as I mentioned before, was done at least 5 to 6 to 7 or so years ago. They still had the baby boomer generation as the most populous, most powerful, richest, so on and so forth group within the given society of the United States of America at that time. And here they speak in such a sense, or at least Mr. Dent Jr. speaks in a sense of a cyclical pattern, in a sense, on how economics usually phases out, especially throughout many of the coming years, and usually set here for much of the research that they have put together. Mr. Dent mentions in a fact that in the United States of America, we seem to be heading into this period of an quote-unquote economic winter. So with what he's actually presenting here, he speaks in a sense of 4 particular times in this particular cycle as far as economics is concerned, which we will be going through or riding the wave through, just to give a little caveat there, or at least an explanation that will be easily digestible as far as what we are presenting here. And again, as we mentioned, we will be putting up a video form of this particular segment, just to give not only an audio here, but some visuals as well, so that ones could actually take some more effective notes. But in this sense, Mr. Dent Jr. Actually presents his power to predict in a sense of life cycles. And we've shared quite a bit of information on how cyclical patterns can be used in a very effective manner, and clearly Mr. Dent Jr. has that type of mindset, or at least that outlook, as far as his research is concerned. And he mentions again that usually any given economy has a particular time which it goes through this cyclical pattern, more so in the same way that we go through any particular year as far as seasons are concerned. So you have an economic spring, you have an economic summer, an economic fall, and an economic winter. So that kind of gives you a visual, or at least a thought process into how this comes into play. And with this particular infographic that has been set in place, we have the cyclical pattern and how it has followed, at least from 1940 on up to 2030. This is the research from the Dent Research Group. Mr. Harry S. Dent Jr. and his associates have put together in this clear and cut and concise, straight to the point, 80-year 4-season cycle. And seemingly so, as we know, we are here in the 2019 year. There is a period that is marked here from right around the time of the 2008 period on up to the 2030 period, approximately, that gives us an outlook of an economic winter. So that kind of gives one's a little bit more insight into what we are alluding to as far as the information that has been presented, and even so what we are seeing out here in the real world. Now, again, speaking to this millennial generation overtaking in number the baby boomer generation at that particular time, and again, respectively, the baby boomer generation in population was somewhere to the tune of 70 to 77 million people. The next generation, right behind the baby boomer generation, actually was called the Generation X population. They were in numbers somewhere to the tune of 60 to 68 or so million people. But as of 2019, and I will have to actually again check the numbers, the facts, or at least what we will be able to gather as far as the counting of this population, or this particular census, or this, again, just entire accounting of the United States of America's population, in this sense, where the millennial generation, which of course is the generation as of now, those who are particularly born from 1986 on up to 1996, some even adjust for a few years on up to about 2006 or 7 or so, depending on what economists or economic analysts you tend to speak with. They tend to adjust for the closeout year for many of the millennial generation births, but they account for at least 80 to 86 million people as far as population is concerned. So that clearly makes the quote-unquote millennial generation the most populous within the United States of America at this very moment. But here again, continuing on in what we were expounding upon from the last segments, we come here to what the Dent Research Group calls the collapse of the American super cities. So again, this will speak again to our earlier points. And again, remembering that these research groups, and this particular group itself, the Dent Research Group, was doing this type of study, or at least bringing about these assessments and these conclusions some 5 to 7 years ago. And here from their website at Economy and Markets, they mentioned the collapse of the American super cities, and where housing prices shot to the moon in early 2006, particularly in 4 U.S. states. The first, Arizona; the second, California; third, Florida; the fourth, Nevada. So when the $1.3 trillion subprime market collapsed in 2008, which we spoke on earlier, real estate in those 4 states crumbled, taking the global economy with them. And they mention here with the Dent Research Group that it's now happening again. House prices in several cities are once again bubbling over, but it won't last. And the examples that they actually give here are 5 in number. The 5th in a countdown would be Atlanta, the 4th, Chicago, the 3rd, Miami, the 2nd, New York, the 1st being Los Angeles, California. And they mention these in a cluster as the most endangered cities in the U.S. as far as the economy is concerned. And with all of these cities, just per se, the Dent Research Group and Mr. Harry S. Dent Jr. and Associates, along with many others who confirm these findings, mention that many of these cities could see many devastating declines in many facets of life. Prices indeed will plummet. All of these will impact other cities across the country, and also it will bring many devastating effects clearly to the U.S. economy, just to say the least on that note. So given a lot of what we are seeing here, what we read from the earlier segments, as far as the millennial generation finding their way, or at least maneuvering around a lot of these economic potential clusters, and a lot of these potential economic dangers, they find themselves having to be a lot more creative than not as far as the past years, the present years, and the coming years are concerned. And here, just continuing on with what is being or has been presented here from Economy and Markets and the Dent Research Group, they mentioned that the next captains of consumption, are again, for the most part, will be between the baby boomers and the millennial generation, not to neglect the Generation X population, but in a sense, with such great population numbers, the baby boomer generation still carries a lot of weight as far as the economy is concerned. So here we continue with their research and their assessment. They mentioned the baby boomers have driven the U.S. economy for decades now, with a $109.2 million, 109.2 million within that population. They were a pig moving through a python, to give an example, quote unquote, but are bloating the workforce, the schools, and now the healthcare system. But as they head off into the sunset, a larger but less impactful generation steps up to take their place as the next captains of consumption, the millennials. Born between 1976 to 2007, and again we adjust for a few years depending on what economists you tend to speak with, there are at least predicted to be 146.3 million millennials. And unlike the baby boomers, they peaked twice, first in 1990 and again in 2007. The rising generation will lead the charge into the next economic boom. So again, we're speaking of expansion, and they actually predict this to come in and around the time of the year 2023. So again, they mention here, but hold on or wait, if these numbers and years for the generation sound different from what you've heard, that's because they are. At the Dent Research Group, they mention that they don't follow conventional marketing definitions of a generation. So again, we mentioned that before, depending on who you speak with, as far as economists or a financial advisor is concerned, ones will have their own particular definitions of what a generation is, or even so many other economic structures, so on and so forth. As far as the topics are concerned, they'll have their own way of presenting that as well. But that's more concerned with experiences and intangible stuff. What the Dent Research Group mentions is they give the cold, hard facts. So they tend to count the number of people from the bottom of the wave to the top, and also they adjust for immigration. So once they know how many people there are, they need to know what they'll likely spend on as far as their income is concerned. And that's where they have a second nifty tool that they've created there at the Dent Research Group, which they call the life cycle spending wave. And this was very interesting to me, just to say the least, because to be honest with you, it was very accurate. In a sense, they mentioned that from the ages of 23 to 32, people tend to get married or have children and buy their first home. Between the ages of 33 to 42, they tend to buy what they call trade-up homes or a bigger house, just to keep it simple. From the ages of 43 to 54, they tend to put their children through college. As far as the United States of America's economy is concerned, if that is something also within any other given society on an international wave, it tends to happen in the same sense or very similarly. And also, between the ages of 43 to 54, ones tend to reach their peak spending cap. So that really speaks to quite a bit of, many generational normalities in a sense. Keeping on with the fourth age group there, they move toward the ages 55 to 65. People or a general population tends to become what they call empty nesters, or usually the children that they have raised and put through college usually move out on their own. And many families tend to not buy a bigger house, so that bigger house that they have bought, or the trade-up home they bought, they tend to downsize after that, or move to certain places that are more befitting for people usually moving into their older years. And here and such as the tail end of this infographic speaks, ones who tend to, or families within a population, couples, groups, so on and so forth, that are 66 and older usually move into their wonder years and retirement. So again, very concise, very strict within many of the rulings, and a lot of the accuracy that is being presented here from the Dent Research Group. Again, we have to give credit where credit is due. It's right on point as far as a structural presentation is concerned, and giving the straight facts to the given population, and understanding things in the simplistic way as possible. So here they move on with much more of their research, mentioning that because they know when millennials will reach those milestones, they're able to use their demand curves to identify what products will likely boom in the years ahead. For example, millennials will spend the most on baby-related stuff in their late 20s and early 30s. This speaks to our earlier segment, in which many of the millennials definitely have been accounted for in getting married later and having children later, and so on and so forth, buying homes later, to the tune of what any given population of people or demographic usually does throughout their years. So all of this, again, speaks to life cycles. It speaks to cyclical economics. It speaks to finance, so on and so forth. Everything that usually happens within a given society, especially if it is progressive and expanding, and even so to stagnation and regression in that sense as well. Again, speaking to those effects of socioeconomics and demographics. Again, the Dent Research Group has definitely gained quite a bit of our eye as far as what they are presenting, and what they have presented so far from over the years, and are still actually active as we speak. We see so many ones not only agreeing but also presenting their own facts, as far as the Brookings Institute and many other institutions in that sense, giving these studies, and again kind of affirming a lot of what the Dent Research Group and many other ones have presented so far. And even so with a mention to the population growth. The last study that we actually had, and we mentioned from the earlier segments, was from a one Bill Frey, and Mr. William Frey of the Brookings Institute. And even so, a lot of the maps and a lot of the charts that he has presented speak to this effect of population growth, even so up into the United States of America's population in the years 2017 to 18, and showing a lot of the regressive states as well as the progressive states, and the states that seem to be stagnating as far as socioeconomics and demographics is concerned. Even so, giving a lot more credence to where a lot of the quote-unquote millennial generation population is thriving as far as home ownership. I guess you can say, in a sense, upward mobility as far as livable wages, in a sense, pinpointing a lot of the places in and around the United States of America where most of the quote-unquote millennial generation seem to be finding their way, or at least finding greener pastures, so to speak, as far as the economy is concerned. And all of this speaks to so many points that we have shown and proven so far. Hopefully ones will again follow up on a lot of this. We definitely will look forward to bringing a lot more of this information to our listeners and those who hear the sound of our voice here on this podcast. And again, we encourage ones to look a lot more intently into things such as these, speaking specifically to socioeconomics and demographics and economics as a whole, and not so much just in their own country, but again, remembering that we live in quite an interesting world with interesting times at this very moment that we happen to be experiencing. And the world is such a different place than it was yesterday, and it will continue to do so as we continue to move throughout our days. But in all, hopefully this has been just as informative to those listening to us at this very moment as it has been for quite some years now. We definitely haven't just started doing a lot of these works. This is not only a little bit of a passion for us, but something that we felt was an honor, a privilege, and a duty to do, especially for those we know and tend to be acquainted with more frequently than not. So again, just sharing a lot of this information so that ones again will be forearmed and forewarned of the things coming on ahead, especially if they have families, especially little ones, at this very moment, and really looking to procure a future for not only themselves but them as well. So all of this information hopefully will be beneficial to you in one way or another. But as always, we thank you for, again, just listening to, our very long podcast here for this evening. We'll have to even check to see how long we actually went as far as presenting this information. But again, we'll look forward to giving a bit more credibility to everything that we have spoken on here and give a little bit more of a visual intake for ones who, will seek this out. Of course, you can search us out as Lidj Yefdi on YouTube. That's LIDJ YEFDI. One more time, LIDJ YEFDI. And that's also the handle on Instagram as well as Twitter. Usually ones can just type us in a search box and we come quickly up. So a lot of our socials are up and running, and we usually are quite accessible. But again, thank you so much for, again, tuning in here to Rastafari on the Brink. I am indeed Lidj Yefdi, Yefdeyah, Johannes Emanuel of RastafariRenaissance.com, and we look forward to coming to you again here on the air. Be safe, be well.
Put my right hand in Jesus, fly like an eagle, fight with these demons, shine light on my people, 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 on my people, on my people, on my people.